Metering software usage. Okay, I need to actually enforce the configuration baseline. Oh, hello. Sorry, I wasn't aware you were paying attention. Um, Let me ask you a question. So, you know this app, Microsoft Project, right? Does this app drive you nuts sometimes? I bet you it does. And I bet you it does, honestly, because, Microsoft Project is one of those apps that every user swears that they need. They swear that they use it all the time. And when you're walking around the hallways, all those users that absolutely swear that they must have Microsoft Project, you never really see them using it. The hard part about being an IT pro is just really knowing kind of intuitively what's going on that network, but in many ways not sometimes having the tools at your disposal to disprove users when they say that they need things that they actually don't. And Microsoft Project is a perfect example of that, but there are others out there. Maybe it's a line of business application that is very legacy, that has been around for years and years and years, and you still are required to maintain it, but nobody's actually used it in years. Well, now that you have Configuration Manager, you maybe for the first time actually have some additional tools that make this entire process of disproving your users' assertions a little bit easier. Built into Configuration Manager is this software metering client agent. And baked into the client is this capacity to actually take a look at the different applications users are using and report on how many minutes those applications are being used over any period of time. With this metering in place, you could actually figure out exactly how many minutes the users in your environment are actually using Microsoft Project on a person-by-person basis, and then drop that into a report so you can harvest up those licenses, those very expensive licenses that you really don't want to spend the money for. In fact, metering software usage is really good for retiring those legacy applications that haven't been touched in years, but you have no other way of disproving the users whenever they tell you that they're actually not using them anymore, when they actually are. Also useful for harvesting those licenses and just really disproving when your users say that they need something that they don't actually need. In fact, software metering may just pay for your configuration manager licenses all by itself, just in the elimination of the unnecessary and unused application in your environment. So in this nugget, I'm going to show you, this will be a very short nugget, how you can configure the client settings, configure some metering rules, and then view the reports that you can then send out to users to disprove the fact that they're not actually using those applications that they say that they are. So let's just minimize my little project file here and go back to my Config Manager server. This is Config Manager 1, the server we've been using throughout the entire series. And I'm taking a look at the software metering node here under Assets and Compliance. Now, before we take a look at these specific software metering rules, what I want to do first is go here under the Administration node and take a look at the client settings. There's not much that you actually have to do here. If I click on software metering, you'll notice that metering is actually enabled. And I believe it's enabled by default. And the data collection, or when each client actually reports on its data, is set to about every 7 days. Now, in a lot of these, I've had you reduce them down from the default of 7 days to a smaller value. But in the case of metering, if you can think about it, I'm not really interested in today's data so much as today's in combination with the last few weeks or months worth of data. And so setting these variables to, or setting these values to essentially their defaults is generally a good idea for software metering. Before you actually create your software metering rules, you may want to take a look also at the software metering properties. Now, up here at the top is the value that we can select for data retention. How many days worth of data do we want to keep? And if you recall, remember how I was talking about Config Manager and how we're really interested in today's data? Well, software metering is probably one of the few instances where we're interested in today's, but also a historical amount of data. Again, the more data that I have, well, the more chance I've got of disproving those users when they say they need apps that they actually don't. Down here in the bottom, and this is new to Config Manager 2012, is the ability for Config Manager to automatically create some disabled metering rules, so they're not turned on, but they're just created, based on the usage data that the client actually sees. So if the client sees people using applications, it can automatically generate a few of these rules on your behalf. Now, by default, if 10% of the computers are using a program, well, we're going to go ahead and create a rule. Also, the number of software metering rules that must be exceeded before we disable the automatic creation. So I can set the minimum and maximum amount on these automatic rules as they get created. And if you take a look down here, you'll see a number of the different applications that we've actually been working with in previous nuggets. Let's take a look down here at the bottom. I'll bet you there's one here for WinZip somewhere. In fact, there's the VMware tray. Oh, there it is, WinZip 32. So based off of all these applications that are being used, every application has an executable file. And if I want, I can go and just simply enable these rules to turn them on and begin gathering information about their usage. Now, let's not actually deal with the ones that are in here. Instead, let's create our own metering rule so you can take a look at how that process looks. In this case, we know that there are some users out there that have an instance of Microsoft Project that we want to harvest back because we know that they're not using it. So let's call this Microsoft Project 2010. Now the file name I'm looking for is winproj.exe. I can limit it down to a specific version if I want, and I'll use wildcards to define a version and all subversions. Limit it to a language, limit it to a description, limit it to a specific site, choose next, and close, and I'm done. That actually creates that winproj file name, and in fact if I can find it up here in the long list of files that exist, there it is. Make sure that that is enabled. Yes, it is indeed enabled. And over the next week or so, my clients will begin importing in data about, well, Windows Project and where it's actually being used. Now, where you actually get the reports out of this are done up in the Reports node up here under Monitoring. And if I take a look at reporting and all of the different categories of reports, here under Software Metering are going to be a number of different reports that exist. Now, I don't have data right now, and I'm not going to wait the week, honestly, to get this data. But what these reports give you, as you can see, are computers that have a program installed but haven't run the program, or that have run it, or the concurrent usage, or even a trend analysis of those specific metered programs. So when I run these reports, I can actually get concurrent usage for example, the WinProj program. And that will give me information based off of what's been collected in the database about the number of users who are running that particular application. If I scroll down here to Windows Project, wherever it is in this long, long list, I'll end up finding it. So this gives you, again, some really, really good detail about how people are using the applications and the patterns of usage of those applications that you can then turn back into making a business decision about whether or not the application actually makes sense to still be used or to harvest unnecessary licenses out of your environment. There's really not much to show here, but I separate this out because the capacity to do this, the ability to have this inside of Configuration Manager is extremely powerful for solving a lot of those really big problems that we in IT have to face every day. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We talked a little bit about my use of Microsoft Project, but we also talked about how software metering helps you determine how much your applications are actually being used. I've probably mentioned it a couple of times now, how retired apps or legacy apps, harvesting licenses and going about disproving those users is a real fundamental reason why software metering exists. And again, from a business perspective, getting rid of those legacy apps that are no longer really being used is a reduction in cost. And getting rid of those unnecessary licenses is a reduction in cost. So this can directly impact your business in implementing some very simple rules here. And then we talked very quickly about how you can configure the client settings, those metering rules, and view a few of the reports that you get after your clients end up reporting on their data. So coming up next, we have forefront endpoint protection. So metering is useful for the applications in your environment, but next we have to focus in on some of the security things in your environment. And baked right into Config Manager, although it's a bit of an extra license, is the ability to manage security right from within your Config Manager console. And that's going to be the topic for this next nugget. But until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.